Welcome, everyone. I am your host, Lindsay Briggs, and this is Start Now by Syracuse University. If you're interested in how trailblazing entrepreneurs got their start during their college years, then stick around. We can't wait to share this innovator's insight on how to run a successful business. Let's get started. Without any further ado, Fred Seibert, thank you for being with us today. Thank you for coming on to the Start Now show to share your story of entrepreneurship and really your life of fulfillment. So without any further ado,
Lindsay.
Thank you. So just to get started, thank you. We know you from MTV networks. How did that all start? It had to be a love for music. We talked about a little bit about your love for the Beatles. Let's start there. Where did the passion start before we talk about anything else? Where is the foundation? Where did it begin?
I don't know that passion starts or stops. I think I've always been a person that's excited about what I do, excited about what I like. And if I'm not excited, I move on.
Right.
And I think I was like that when I was a little kid. I've been like that pretty much all through my life. I come from a family of entrepreneurs, mom and pop entrepreneurs. My parents were pharmacists who had a little pharmacy in Long Island. Their parents before them, my dad had his dad had a general store in a farm town in upstate New York. And my mother, who was a political refugee after World War II, her father not only had a pharmacy, but was an inventor of medicines. So I've sort of earned my entrepreneurship and my DIY-ness in an honest way. And when I was 12, a cultural explosion happened, and I fell in love with the Beatles. And I didn't know at that moment that my life had changed permanently because I just kept going being a science math kid. And I went to college to major in chemistry. And one day, as I say fairly often, I looked at my lab mate and I said, I like the Beatles more than this. And I walked out and I walked up to my college radio station and I never left. I so much never left that I still haven't graduated from college.
Talk about passion that never stopped. It never ceased. That is a wonderful story. So how did knowing that you came from a family of chemists and you knew you were going to be a chemist, but then the kind of trajectory of your life changed because of passion. How did that feel to even, tell your family, hey, I'm making a change here. I'm doing something different?
Well, it felt great to me. It just didn't feel great to them. My parents had a plan. I fit into the plan. And my mother in particular had been raised by a very powerful father, and he had a plan, and my mother went with his plan. So she just assumed that I was going to go with her plan. And when I announced that, in fact, I was more interested in being a record producer than a chemist, the war began. It was tough. I don't think we had a civil word for the next 10 years.
So did you lean into your group of friends and your community? I know when we talk about entrepreneurship and starting something, it's a lonely road, right? It's, unless you find those people that you can really gel with and you can build with, it can be a lonely, isolating road. And so how did you navigate that as a young person, just knowing what you wanted to do and building relationships with others?
It's funny. I never really thought about it, but as you mention it, the path that I chose was because I wanted to have a band like the Beatles. And so from the very beginning, in my era, in the same way that people have an Instagram account, everybody had a band. Like literally, I think like the next day after the Beatles went on television, we all went and bought instruments and said, now we have a band. And so for those several years, like going into my 20s, I was in bands, which meant that I had a built-in community. And, I hadn't really thought about it until this minute, but having a band is being entrepreneurial, right? Because you had to go and find gigs and you hoped occasionally you get paid for those gigs so that you could buy, better equipment for the band or buy a better instrument or something like that. So pretty much from the beginning, I was surrounded by a group of like-minded people. And I always did with my friends, we were always sort of expanding, like when I went to college, some of my high school bandmates, they found some new bandmates from another high school, down the road. And all of a sudden there was a new group of friends, by the way, many of which went to Syracuse, when I went to college. And, when I started my first, I don't know if it was my first adult, I guess it was my first adult business. It was because a friend of mine had a little hippie record store and he wanted, in our day, getting a record deal was the biggest deal in the world. And one day he said to me, I'd really like to get a record deal. And I had just read an article in a magazine about all of these other hippies who were starting their own record companies. And I looked at my friend, I said, so why don't you start your own record company? Just do it yourself. Because I had come out of that kind of model, with my folks with their store. And he said, gee, that's interesting. Do you want to do it with me? I was like, oh, sure. I didn't know anything about making a record. I didn't know anything about, I knew a little bit about recording. I certainly knew about music. And he said, well, there's an ad in the back of this magazine that says we can press 2,000 records in the next town. We just need $1,800, which of course we didn't have. And, it sort of ballooned from there that now all of a sudden I had a business doing the thing that I most loved, which is making music.
That's amazing. And so when you're starting, like you said, referencing the $1,800, that you didn't have, a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs or founders that are in the startup phase, resources are very limited, but it's about mindset. It's about, wanting to get it done. Can you talk about just that journey and those experiences building MTV, networks?
It took a long time. And eventually I landed a job at a radio station. The problem for me is it was a country music radio station. I grew up in the New York area and country music was not exactly in our wheelhouse. But I stumbled into a mentor. And this mentor was one of the smartest people I've ever met, one of the smartest creative people I've ever met. Honestly, I don't go through one day ever now without thinking about something that he taught me. And more importantly, what I really stumbled into is a guy who had to teach me. He was unhappy if his staff wouldn't learn from him. And I was desperate to learn. And one day I get a call from a guy that I had met through him from another radio station. He said, oh, I left radio and I'm in television now. I'm in cable television. And, in those days, cable television was sort of technologically the equivalent to VR and AR today. It was like this wild new technology. Right. It wasn't so wild, but it seemed that way to us. Mm-hmm. And he said, oh, I heard you might want to work for me in television. And I said, oh, well, no, I really don't. I like to watch television. I have no desire to make it. I still was in my mind, I wanted to make records.
Right.
And he said, oh, come and meet me. Now, to put it in context, I was 27 years old. He was 25 years old. I go to have coffee with him. And lo and behold, I found out that this guy is way smarter than I am. And one of the lessons my mentor had taught me was that the job doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the boss. And the guy I was working for at that time in radio, I thought was an idiot. He wasn't, but he was not the right guy for me. Right. And this young guy was like offering me something, and he was smart. And I quit my job in radio the next day and went to work at the company that became MTV Networks. I thought I had died and gone to heaven, because now I was going to be able to see a band every day, every hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I realized this is the channel I'd been waiting for my entire life. And once I realized that I could be part of inventing that experience, I was both amazed and distressed, because the music that MTV played, so remember, I was at that time 27, 28 years old. The music I liked was 10 years out of date. And now MTV was playing all of this music that I really just personally didn't have that much interest in. So here's what I did. In my head, I imagined that all of the music videos were of bands that I loved. It was James Brown. It was the Rolling Stones. It was Aretha Franklin. It was the Beach Boys. It was, whoever I liked, I could put in, instead of listening to Duran Duran and Pat Benatar and, Flock of Seagulls or whatever those bands were. I imagined that it was what I liked when I was a teenager. And everything I could build around that was the idea of how would I like to see this stuff presented? And that was that great moment that you asked for, is my recognition that I could be part of something that I've been waiting for my entire, from the time I was 12 years old.
I want to hear more about, some of the companies that you started. MTV is a big one. It's great. But we know, just like Fred Films, we know you've had your hands in other, companies. So can we hear a little bit about those?
So at MTV, I worked there for 3 years. I got promoted. I was the first person made a vice president at the company. The peers that I had, became superstars in the media world, and I couldn't take it. And I spent a year at the job figuring out what my next move was going to be. And eventually I went to my buddy Alan and I said, here's what I think we should be doing. Let's start a production company and make TV shows and movies. Right. And so when we quit and started our own company, we claimed to be the first media branding company in the world. And the first big assignment we got was MTV also owned Nickelodeon. Right. Nickelodeon was the lowest rated of those 30 cable TV channels. They had lost the equivalent of a couple $100 million today, and the company was ready to shut them down. Mm. Our ex-boss calls us and said, we need you to fix it. And we looked at him and we said, well, we don't really like kids' TV. And we don't really like those people who work at Nickelodeon. He goes, look, I fired a lot of them. Don't worry about it. He said, we don't even really know if we like kids. And then we looked at our bank account. And we looked at him and we said, how much do you pay us? And he told us, and we'll take the job. 6 months later, Nickelodeon became the #1 cable network based on the work that we did. And we were off to the races. So 10 years, very successful company, very high visibility because of the work that we had done for all of these places. And I get a phone call And the phone call was from Turner Broadcasting, which was started by Ted Turner, the guy who invented CNN, Cartoon Network, TBS, TNT. And the president of his company said, we just bought the Hanna-Barbera cartoon studio. I said, yeah, I read about it in the paper. He goes, why don't you come and run it? And once again, I turned down the job. And I said, look, I don't really know anything about cartoons. He said, well, what are you going to do? You're closing your company. What are you going to do? I said, I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do next. He goes, here, I'm giving you what you're going to do next. You're going to come to LA and make cartoons. I moved to LA. I divorced my wife. I divorced my partner. I divorced all my clients. I walk into this building that I've been driving past for 20 years. And the first time I set foot in the place, I'm president of the company, and I know nothing about making cartoons. I mean, nothing. And all of a sudden, I'm back right where I started, which is in an incredible place with an incredible opportunity, not knowing a thing, having to teach myself how to make it work. I decided to start my own company again, and I started a company called Frederator that made cartoons on my own as an independent. I went back and signed a deal with my friends at Nickelodeon and MTV to work for them and be an independent producer and consultant for them. They thought I was much more valuable than I think I was, but they paid me really nicely to be exclusive to their business. I did that for 20 years, made some real successes. We made Adventure Time. We made The Fairly Odd Parents. We made Castlevania for Netflix. And along the way, I discovered, like a lot of other people, the internet. And a friend of mine told me one day, you'd be perfect for the internet. I said, I'm too old. I was 48 years old. I said, I'm just learning the cartoon business. He goes, it's really perfect for you. And I said, look, it's hard enough for me to, order books on Amazon. Like, this is a young person's game. 3 months later, I was running MTV and Nickelodeon's internet business.
Wow.
One thing led to another. It was a disaster. I was the wrong guy in the wrong job, working for the wrong boss in the wrong company. And I quit in less than a year. But I dragged along a 25-year-old engineer that I had hired, who also didn't really like working there. We started a new company and eventually started the first programming company on YouTube called Next New Networks. Along the way, I had an intern. My intern invented Tumblr, and I became the first investor in Tumblr, not knowing anything. The Tumblr inventor was 19 years old. My partner was 25 years old, and I was 50 years old. And I was like the blind man in the forest, and they were holding my hand, showing me through the forest of the internet. And what was great about that is that people who were my age still didn't know how to use their email. And here I was, like, starting a new company in that space. Eventually, Google bought our Next New Networks company. I didn't go to work for Google. All the rest of my colleagues did. But now I had a foot in that space in a way that very few other people did. Started my own YouTube businesses, blah, 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 blah. Then I went broke. I overextended myself on my YouTube side. My cartoon business was going fabulously. And I had to scramble and merge Frederator into another company in order to, like, stay alive and keep my employees employed. And after 5 years, I wasn't having a good time again. I was spending all of my time negotiating with my partners for everything instead of doing what I'd done my whole life, which is make my own decisions. And so about 2 years ago, I quit the company that I had run for 20 years and started this new company, Fred Films. So I took way too long to go through everything else, but you asked me about everything else. You asked for it. So you got it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Questions.
So the questions. What's, in your opinion, is the most important thing about working with creatives?
Understanding that they know more than you do. Understanding that great creative people can see the future because they are literally defining the future. Whether it's a novelist or a painter or a filmmaker, they start with a blank screen, a blank piece of paper, whatever form they come on, and they imagine a world that they wish existed. And if you're lucky, it's a world that sort of looks like the world that we know, but is different and better. I look at it as, like in science fiction, there's Earth and Earth 2. A great creative person is always that person who's creating Earth 2.
Right.
And, the biggest mistake that people like me make is thinking that we know more than those creative people that we work with. Interestingly, what you will hear from creative people often is the biggest problem in their life is all these people giving them opinions about how they could make their work better. And I came to the conclusion that if I could do it better, why did I need them? And the fact is, I can't do it better. I can't come anywhere near what they do. My job is to enjoy what they do and to love what they do. And I've kind of tried to run my career that way. Not every great creative person is going to come up with something that I think I can be helpful with.
Right.
But my job is to continually meet as many wonderful creative people as possible until we find that little place where we sync up together. And then I let them do what they do best.
I love it. I love it. It's like you're continuously searching and giving the space for creatives to like really find and hone in on their space of genius.
And guess what? I'm giving myself the space to be excited tomorrow. That's what makes my job fantastic, is I give myself the chance to be excited too.
Thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. It's been a pleasure being here. It's been several years since I've been been able to talk to the program. I'm thrilled to do it. And I know that there are going to be people in this group that we will all be following someday.
For sure. I believe that too. Thank you so much, Fred. And thank you everyone for being a part of this show, being a part of the conversation and sending in your questions, keeping the conversation going. And I hope that you can join us for our next Start Now series as we keep it going. So thank you, Fred, and everyone have a great night.
Thank you.
Join us next time on another episode of Start Now. To see more episodes, visit newhouse.syr.edu/startnow.